Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad, never good, fill my head full of every single doubt.
Hello everybody, it is That Effin' Sports Show. You are here with myself, Adam Hulse, and we are wrapping up the entire NFL. We've gone division by division in preparation for the draft, which is days, mere hours away to us NFL junkies. We're counting down the hours already. We've gone through every division except one. I don't know if we purposely left this division towards the end, but there's definitely plenty to talk about. We are at NFC North. We know the teams that are here. We're going to have a great conversation. It's going to be made even better because every week, every episode, we bring in the Adam Hulse. Good morning, Adam. How are you doing?
Man, it's crazy to think we've already been through all 8 divisions now. 2 months of this series really flew by. I think I said it last week. I know I've said it a couple times. The NFL has really done a great job in recent years of how they've structured this offseason, where it never really feels like an offseason. There's always something going on.
2 months feels like 3 weeks, but aside from that, the drama is there. There is still something to talk about, even though we're in that mandatory lull period before the draft, as teams are really starting to nail down what they're going to do based on what they've done already. We come to the NFC North. It's still one of the NFL's biggest stories. And we didn't, like I said, we didn't really do this on purpose. Here we are. We're going to end up talking about Green Bay, of course. We're going to talk about Detroit, which has had a great free agency, I think. Chicago has had a very deliberate free agency. Obviously, we know what they've done. We're going to start off with Minnesota, because Minnesota is the most successful team in this division as of last year. They managed to keep pretty much their key pieces around. We don't know what's going to happen with Cook just yet. This is probably Cousins last year, or so the rumor mill goes. They lose their defensive tackle to Cleveland. They lose Thielen, who I think they're fine with losing because of his age and his role and what he does. They lose Peterson. That's a big hit. I'm happy as a Steelers fan that we got Peterson. They did lose Kendricks. That I think is a big piece as well. And they trade off tight ends. They deal away Irv Smith to Cincinnati. They bring in Josh Oliver from Baltimore. They bring in Byron Murphy. They just signed Jojuan Williams from New England. And they pick up a pair of tight ends in Marcus Davenport and Dean Lowry. Dean Lowry, interdivisional from Green Bay. They managed to keep Madison. They managed to keep Udo. They keep Bradbury. They keep Bullard. Not a lot of excitement in the Vikings free agency, but I think they're still probably, I'm not going to say most solid because we haven't talked about the other teams, but they're still very solid. Good trade-off. They're still going to be a powerful team. They didn't hurt themselves.
Yeah, I mean, relatively quiet when, you just listed off the moves there. Sure, there's, some that jump out a little bit, but nothing major. I'm sure, Vikings fans are feeling the loss of Thielen a lot more than NFL fans in general because of what Thielen means to the Vikings and to their fan base. But he's a pretty easily replaceable player at this point in his career. He's pretty well past his prime at this point. I mean, there's no reason to think that right now, with the way that the Vikings are currently structured, with the state of the division, assuming Aaron Rodgers does get traded. Now, I know, Detroit and Chicago definitely made some improvements, but, in my mind right now, I think the Vikings are a pretty heavy favorite to win this division again this year as it currently sits.
I think there could be an argument made, but you're right. As of right now on paper, no games being played. If you're being subjective, I can definitely agree with that. And there's something to be said for not having a lot to talk about. That means that they've probably made some smart moves. They haven't taken any big risks. Now you got to risk it for the biscuit, but they already had a pretty solid squad. So if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right. Cousins, sure, he's entering the last year of his contract. There's been a little bit of buzz with the Vikings around the quarterback. Remember very early in the offseason around the scouting combine when there was rumors that, the San Francisco 49ers were interested in Kirk Cousins? And, I mean, nothing really came of that rumor. And who knows if the Niners were really interested in him or if it was the Vikings kind of shopping him around. Now they're somewhat connected to the idea of possibly Trey Lance, who would presumably back up Cousins for 1 year. Because, look, I mean, Cousins is in the last year of his contract. Him being a trade candidate isn't crazy to think about, but most likely he's going to play out this last year of his contract. And then what do the Vikings do next year? Because they do not have his replacement on the roster right now. Are they going to draft a quarterback? That's definitely a possibility. Are they going to trade for somebody like Trey Lance, who they can groom for a year behind Cousins, analyze, see what they had? Because at this point, Lance is going to be pretty cheap in the trade market. And then, speaking of trade market too, you brought it up with the Dalvin Cook thing. It kind of sounds like he's going to be dealt as well. He's definitely a name to watch during the draft. He could be one of those superstar players that gets dealt while the draft is going on for a pick, for that type of deal.
Yeah, and look, this is why we have Adam Hulse on. Adam Hulse at Adam Hulse Sports on Twitter, over at Sportskeeda, because you're breaking it down exactly the way Minnesota, where the story is in Minnesota right now. What is after this year? Because Cousins will find a buyer. We see the quarterback market this year. Every year there's a quarterback market. There's more positions than there are talent. Cousins is probably on the back end, but he's definitely going to find a home. The problem with Minnesota right now is that they don't pick until the 23rd, which is fine. It's first round. You can find talent at whatever you're trying to look at, but then they don't pick until round 3 in the 80s, like 87 or something like that. After that, they don't pick again until 119. They're going to have to find a diamond in the rough. And you talk about Dalvin Cook. I think if I'm in Minnesota, I'm trying to hold on to Dalvin Cook this year because I'm going to need to trade him next year. They just don't have a lot of clout in this draft. They're going to need draft capital for next year to replace someone like Cousins and whoever else is going to leave, because they just don't have the draft picks this year.
Right, and I think that's maybe why they've been connected to a guy like Trey Lance, because Trey Lance is so young and inexperienced that bringing him in is essentially kind of the same thing as drafting a rookie this year, especially with, like you said, they don't have a top 10 pick. They're not getting one of the top guys. They're going to get more of like a shot in the dark, developmental type of quarterback as opposed to the established prospects. Now, established prospects, just because, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and Will Levis are highly rated quarterbacks does not mean they're going to be great NFL quarterbacks. They're just a little bit safer than some others, but we don't know how any of these quarterbacks are going to turn out. As we see year after year after year, the top guys are not always the ones who perform the best in the NFL.
You're right. Year after year, it's a crapshoot. There's always 4 or 5 guys that are touted that are going to go in the first round. You look at a Johnny Manziel. He was supposed to go way sooner, but there wasn't a need until he went to Cleveland. You see how that pans out. You see that all the time. You see the Ryan Leafs. You see that story gets played every year. You've got the top guys, but they're not all winners. You look back at Heisman candidates, you get the same story. Winning the Heisman used to be a curse for a while because everybody who won the Heisman didn't pan out. That's what the draft is. The draft, anybody you take in the draft is a chance. You've got 260 rarabouts coming in, and they're not all going to pan out. There's a lot of people that aren't going to be on a roster next year.
And, there's all these draft quote unquote experts, and sure, they give you your breakdowns and this and that. But I mean, a great example of it is Mitch Trubisky was drafted before Patrick Mahomes. And even when the Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes, most of these so-called experts said that they said that it was unnecessary for them to move up and go there and get Patrick Mahomes, especially because they have Alex Smith. And it was kind of considered an unnecessary, risky, reachy type of pick. But obviously, looking back, it surely wasn't. So, you have to be careful with, a lot of this buzz around the draft, because a lot of it really just is a guessing game. And just because someone is what they are in the pros, they could be a lot better in the pros than they were in college, or vice versa. Superstars in college are not always superstars in the NFL.
Yeah, Tim Couch, fantastic NFLer, didn't pan out in the NFL. And then you got a guy like Purdy, last pick, Mr. Relevant, already has a starting job. We haven't even started training camp. And then there was this other guy. What was his name? Brady, I think his name was. He did okay. He did all right.
He did all right. Mm-hmm. To a guy
Brady,
who almost went undrafted, right?
Yeah, Tim Brady, Todd Brady, Tom, whatever it was. So we move out of Minnesota and we go over to Detroit. I personally really like Detroit. I thought they were very strong coming out of the end of the season, and I think they've made some really good moves. They lose DJ Chark and they lose Jamal Williams. Those to me are the big losses, but also replaceable losses, as they bring in Sutton from Pittsburgh. It's a downgrade, but it's still a nice replacement. and they bring in Montgomery from Chicago, who can very easily fill the Williams role, being that Williams was the backup. I think Montgomery can take over as the starter if he wants to at some point. They've done a really good job of replacing what they lost. They lose Chark, they bring in Sutton. They lose Williams, they bring in Montgomery. They lose Mike Hughes at cornerback, they bring in Mosley from San Francisco. They lose Deshaun Elliott at safety, they bring in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson from Philadelphia. They lose Brown at guard, they bring in Glasgow from Denver. They lose a linebacker to New England, they bring in none from Houston. So, I mean, they haven't lost anything. They've replaced everything that they've lost. They've put someone in the position, generally around the same skill set. Throw on top that they have 2 first-round picks at 6 and 18. Detroit is very scary right now.
I mean, yeah, Detroit's in a great position. You listed off kind of the moves. I mean, some of those are upgrades, some of them are downgrades, but not significant downgrades, more lateral type of stuff, or like the way you see it, a running back. Like, I know you're super high on Jamal Williams. I'm sure some would argue that Montgomery's an upgrade, while others would argue that that's a downgrade. That's kind of just how you would rank those two types of players. Detroit, what they did last year, they were such a great story. Detroit kind of seems like where they're at right now between last year and this offseason and heading into this year is they're like everyone's second favorite team, right? You know, like you have your team that you're a fan of, but like who doesn't like what Detroit is doing right now and their story with their troubled past and all that and their lack of ever having postseason success. And, you know, they obviously fell 1 game short of the playoffs last year. They're expecting to be a playoff team this year, especially with the NFC on the relatively weaker side. I mean, what's not to love about the Detroit Lions right now?
Yeah, they're kind of that team that you're rooting for. You want them to do well. You watch them every week, check the scores, you overcheck the fantasy players. There's people you're not going to take in the first or second rounds, but there's guys that you want on your fantasy roster right now because the team finished well. Again, they've got seemingly a solid roster. They've got 2 first-round picks. They're going to have a nice draft. I'm excited to see what Detroit's going to do.
Fun team to watch. They look like they have fun on the field. I mean, Dan Campbell, their coach, I mean, who doesn't love Dan Campbell? How awesome is Dan Campbell? I think that's a dome
thing too, right? Like teams that play in domes are just fun to watch. I don't know why. Maybe it's the enclosed thing. I don't know, but you like to watch teams in dome. Maybe because they air it out more. I don't know. But teams in domes, they're fun to watch. And I think the Montgomery Williams thing, downgrade, upgrade, I think it's just a role thing, right? I mean, they both catch the ball. Jamal has tied for the most touchdowns in the NFL. The most touchdowns in the entire NFL as a backup, but that's based on your role. That's why people play around with the numbers. That's why you got to be careful when you hear the numbers. I do love Jamal Williams. I think he's a great talent. More importantly, I think he's fantastic to have in the locker room. Downgrade, upgrade is just going to be a matter of how they utilize Montgomery versus Williams. They may not even be related. This could be the LeBron James, Michael Jordan argument. You want to compare them because they're the greatest players in their time, but you can't truly compare them because they played in a completely different version of the sport that they play. Williams and Montgomery could definitely play a completely different role with the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, and I mean, I like David Montgomery, and mostly because I just have an optimism about Montgomery that he was playing on the Bears. Awful offensive line for pretty much the entire time he was there, and he still produced very quietly, very strong numbers despite that terrible offensive line. I think in a little bit of a better situation, a better offense around him, I think he can really thrive, kind of sharing carries with DeAndre Swift. I like the outlook for Montgomery this season. And look, you mentioned, the 2 first-round picks, also 2 relatively high first-round picks. And let's throw one other thing into that mix of those first-round picks, is it's kind of like they have 3 first-round picks because they're getting Jameson Williams. He didn't play last year, their first-round pick from last season. He's coming back this year, so you can essentially say they're going to have 3 first-round talents coming next season.
Detroit's kind of just set up for success, seemingly. I mean, we're going to have to see it. They're going to have to prove it. You talk about Montgomery. Montgomery had 800 yards, 5 touchdowns, and that's with Fields there. Montgomery is essentially the backup running back, even though he's in the starting role because Fields is there. Still comes out with 800 yards, over 200 carries, played 16 games. Detroit gets a steal there, I think. And again, they don't lose anything. And I think in that sense, they definitely, I'm not going to say upgrade because I don't want to downgrade Williams, but again, from the usage standpoint, I think Montgomery's going to see a lot more usage than Williams did, despite Williams tying for the most touchdowns in the NFL.
A little bit of a different running style with Montgomery. He's also a little bit younger. And again, I'm optimistic because he came from a really bad situation and he's now in an even better situation than he was. So his numbers might even spike a little bit.
Yeah, Montgomery's a beast. I don't think we can argue that. Probably one of those guys that you might already be eyeing up for your fantasy team next year. We move on to Chicago because we brought up Fields, so we may as well just head on over. Chicago's, of course, big story is that they had the number 1 pick overall. They had the best pick in the entire draft, arguably, because nobody likes having the number 1 pick in your fantasy draft either. They go ahead and trade it off, so now they have the 9th pick. In the trade-off, they get DJ Moore. Great pickup. I'm big on DJ Moore. I think he's a phenomenal talent. They get the number 9, they get the number 61, and then they get a first round next year and a second round the year after. So they got paid essentially in capital and in DJ Moore. They've only lost Montgomery and Reif at tackle. They've brought in 3 Tennesseers. At linebacker, they bring in Cole, they bring in guard Mark Davis, they bring in defensive end DeMarcus Walker. They also bring in Trevon Edmonds from Buffalo. They bring in Foreman and Homer at running back. They bring another defensive end, Green from Houston. They bring in Billings at defensive tackle. They even bring in Tunyon from Green Bay, another interdivisional transfer, which is always nice if you're on the receiving end. And I think Tunyon's a good guy. He's big, he's strong. He will catch the ball if you throw it to him. Great blocker. They've brought in a lot of talent, and they have the 9th pick, and they've got more draft picks coming up. And like I said, DJ Moore, I think Chicago is definitely making an effort.
Yeah, and they're not doing anything too crazy, and I think that they are building the right way. I 100% agree with trading the number 1 overall pick when you're a team like Chicago, because you don't need a quarterback right now. I do believe in Justin Fields, and I at least believe that they need to continue giving him his chance and surrounding him with a legitimate situation. I mean, he had no receivers. So getting DJ Moore is huge. DJ Moore is a number 1 wide receiver. They need to continue surrounding Justin Fields with extra talent. Trading the number 1 pick, getting more pick, getting DJ Moore, is going to allow them to do so. And I like what they're doing.
No, I love it. I love what this entire division is doing, to be honest. They get 2 picks in the second round. They get the first pick in the third round. They've got a great draft setup already laid out in front of them. They've still got the number 9th pick. They're still within the top 10. They bring in a ton of defensive talent. Now, they need an offensive line. You already brought it up. They haven't brought in any offensive linemen, although I think Tunyon is a good addition to help with that, because I think he's a great blocker, and he's big. He's huge and he's strong, but they need help on the offensive line. So I think you're probably going to see definitely some offensive line talent get picked up from the Bears. And there's definitely talent out there, especially sitting at the 9th draft position. I mean, you could argue you get the top offensive linemen, or at least top 2 offensive linemen that are in the draft this year sitting at number 9.
With that top pick, they need to be going offensive line. And if they're not going offensive line, I mean, they can also explore the possibility of trading out of 9 again and stockpiling even more picks, because also part of them trading away the number 1 overall pick, besides not needing a quarterback, I think they're fully aware that they have a lot more than just like one concern. They have a lot of things that they kind of need. For me, offensive line being number 1, protect Justin Fields a little bit better. But there are holes on this roster, and they are starting to address some of them. But the more picks, the better for the Bears right now. The more assets, the better. There's not just like this one glaring thing that they need. They need a lot of pieces. If they can get, one of the offensive tackles at number 9, definitely go for it if they're all still there. I mean, they might be able to get that at 16 also and trade at a 9 and get another first-round pick and another second or third. Keep building. They're going in the right direction. Just keep it going that way.
Yeah, I mean, they could grab Skoronski from Northwestern. They get Johnson from Ohio State. They get Harrison from Oklahoma. I mean, like I said, there's talent, and if you miss on one, there's still a couple other guys there. So sitting at number 9, they've got a real great shot to grab a fantastic elite prospect at offensive line. And with the teams ahead of them, I mean, Carolina's with the first pick, obviously not going offensive line. Neither is Houston. Arizona, you could debate that. Indianapolis, you could debate that as well. Seattle's probably not going O-line. Detroit's probably not going O-line. The Raiders probably aren't going O-line. The Falcons, they have a lot of needs, so they could go anywhere. And so you're still going to have a top prospect sitting there at 9 to beef up that offensive line. They're in a good spot. They got some capital. You're absolutely right that DJ Moore is a number 1 guy, 100%. They've beefed up their defense. So really, that's their main look right now is the offensive line. Really liking Chicago's setup right now.
Right. And, they obviously got a haul for trading the number 1 pick. And let's look at a scenario like this, right? They're on the clock at number 9. A guy like Levis or Richardson is still available there at number 9. And there's a team that wants to go get him. And they're like, we didn't think he'd last this long. We want Levis or Richardson. If I'm the Bears, I'm taking those calls because you can arguably get another haul for that number 9 pick. We don't know how the draft is going to play out. We don't know where these quarterbacks are going to fall. And honestly, we don't know exactly how these teams feel about these quarterbacks. All we know is what, we talked about it before, the quote-unquote draft experts. That's the only thing we know about what to think about these quarterbacks and how highly they're going to go in these professional mock drafts and like all that kind of stuff. Let's remember too, these mock drafts are wrong every single year.
Every single year.
Every year. I mean, let's go as soon as last year, right? Malik Willis was supposed to be a top 15 pick. He didn't go till the 3rd rounds, and there's examples of that all the time. Yeah, and like the year before, right? For forever, it seems like the San Francisco 49ers were taking Mac Jones with the number 3 pick, right? That was all the buzz. They moved up to get Mac Jones or Justin Fields, and they went Trey Lance. So look, like these experts, like, yes, they're great for the information that they give you, but let's not forget that they are wrong about this kind of stuff every single year. They may be better at guessing than most people are, but they are still just guessing.
You look at the trade thing, you got Tennessee Titans sitting there at 11. They might be looking at a quarterback if they don't feel like Willis is the future. You got the Jets sitting at 13. Who knows what's going through their head at quarterback right now, the fact that they don't have that deal signed. We'll talk about that in just a second. You got the Patriots sitting at 14. I think it's fair to say that they wouldn't mind having some quarterback insurance. Green Bay at 15, they want to go with Love. And then you got Washington Commanders sitting at 16. They don't even have a quarterback right now, not a real one. So, I mean, there's plenty of teams that might want to trade up if it happens that one of those top guys is there. So that's another great scenario that plays out. Chicago is just, they're owning this offseason, this free agency. They're doing a great job and they're set up to keep doing it. What they do with it on the field, yet to see. That takes us to Green Bay. Green Bay's got the 15th pick. Nice spot, sitting right in the middle. They lose a lot of people. You could say this was related to the Rodgers thing. Maybe they're fed up with it as well. But most of the people they lose are on the defensive side of the ball. All right, they lose Barnes to Arizona. We just talked about Tunyon. We talked about Dean Lowry going to Minnesota. Reed goes to Seattle at defensive end. Lazard, of course, has gone to the Jets, presumably because Rodgers is going to the Jets and Rodgers wants him. The only thing they've really brought in is they brought in Tavarius Moore from San Francisco, which is a good pickup at safety, and they brought in a long snapper. Those are the big acquisitions from Green Bay. So apparently Green Bay is happy with what they have. I really don't know what Green Bay is doing. We don't know what's going on with Rodgers. We kind of thought this deal was going to get done already. Maybe something happens during the draft. Green Bay is kind of a big question mark. Are they good? I mean, are they good enough to not be doing anything like they've been doing?
No, I mean, probably not. But I think the big issue right now with Green Bay is Rodgers. I mean, he's that big black cloud kind of hanging over them right now. And his huge $60 million contract that he has, they don't know what they have the flexibility to do until he's gone and until they know what that looks like and what they're getting in return and how the financials are all going to work out. They just don't know. Like, what if, this Rodgers thing isn't done by the draft and the Jets decide to draft a quarterback, or if this Rodgers thing isn't done by the draft and the Jets get on the phone with the Ravens and go after Lamar Jackson. I mean, we don't know how this is going to play out until it's done. The Jets-Rodgers thing seemed like much more of a guarantee a couple of weeks ago than it does right now because of the story coming out about Woody Johnson wanting insurance in the form of conditional picks and the Packers saying, no, you already agreed to this deal in principle and we're not going to change it now. The story goes, or rumor has it, that Woody Johnson got spooked when Rodgers went on the Pat McAfee show and said that he was about 90% retired and how close he was to retirement. And Woody Johnson's kind of like, well, if I go and trade for this guy and mortgage my entire future to go get him, I don't want just a one-year rental. So I want insurances just in case he retires after one season. He wants that conditional first-round stipulation for next year's draft pick. And the Packers are saying, wait a second, no. You want this guy. You told us what you would pay to get him before we gave you permission to go interview him. him. So why are we changing the package now?
The Jets already stole Lazard. Good on them. I don't really blame the Jets. And a lot of people have been saying that. I've been saying it kind of from the jump that was the question with Rodgers. A lot of people want to question Rodgers' age and question, does he still have it? Which is ridiculous, being that he went MVP 2 years, 2 times right in a row. Like, Rodgers is fine, talent level, but it's his head. That's what you got to worry about.
And
his head.
You just have to worry about how much Rodgers really cares about winning. With that whole head thing. And I mean, he obviously has this long history now of choking in big spots. He did it just last year. All he had to do was beat the Lions in the final game of the season, and the Packers were going to the playoffs. And he lost that game. That was essentially a playoff game that Rodgers came up short again. And it's just that mental aspect, like you were just touching on. And I'm just not so sure how motivated Rodgers is. Look, like all the people who talk about the NFL talk about how much Rodgers needs one more Super Bowl ring, but I don't know if Rodgers even really cares about that. We all seem to care about it. His legacy needs one more. Legendary quarterbacks win multiple Super Bowl rings, not just one. But like, does he strike you as a guy who's all in no matter what? I need to win another Super Bowl ring? Because to me, he doesn't seem like that's really his motivation right now.
You go back a couple seasons when they went like 0-4, and his big quote is relax. And everybody likes it at the time. It's like, oh, look, this guy's, Joe Cool. He's not worried about it. And they end up making the playoffs that year and a choke again. But that's been his attitude for a while. He's just going with the flow. Everybody just relax. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to sling it. Maybe we win. Maybe we don't. It's cool. Everybody relax. And at the time he was talking about relax, our season's going to be fine. And you look at his off the field actions, you look at the things he's saying, and you're absolutely right. This is not your hardcore competitor. This is not the captain of the team that is he's not Mahomes in it. He's not Joe Burrowing it. He's phoning it in. He's Jay Cutler-ing it. Remember Cutler? I kind of just said it again, but that was one of my favorite quotes from Jay Cutler when he went to the Dolphins. He said, I'm just going to go out there and sling it. That was his attitude. He didn't care. I'm going to collect a paycheck. I'm going to go out there and throw the ball, and whatever happens, happens. And that's what you see from Rodgers right now. And so, yeah, I think the Jets should be worried. I think they got him way over their head. I don't know that they're not too far gone now. It's you feel like they're already pot committed. And so they're going to have to make this happen, because what are they going to do otherwise?
Look, I mean, it's going to be a really tough thing for the Jets to sell to their fan base anything other than Aaron Rodgers at this point, unless it's Lamar Jackson. I think maybe they can accept that because of who Lamar Jackson is, also a superstar. But can you imagine if the Jets, after all this, end up starting Zach Wilson week 1? That would be one of the biggest disasters I can remember in a really long time, with how much this whole Rodgers thing has been hyped up and basically seemed like a guarantee, with Rodgers saying he wants to go there and the Jets saying they want him and the players recruiting him on Twitter and all this crazy stuff, that it basically seemed like a done deal. But it seemed like a done deal for weeks now, and it's still not. Now, the draft to me is going to be the big indicator. If he's not dealt before the draft or during the draft, that's when it becomes a legitimate thing to worry about, that this really might not happen. And if it doesn't happen, I don't exactly know where Rodgers goes. Now, there's rumors that the Tennessee Titans are another player in this mix, and that's fine. And I'm sure other teams would be kind of interested. But, with the amount of money and whatnot that it takes to bring in an Aaron Rodgers, I mean, there's no way he's the Packers quarterback for week 1. In my mind, there's just no way that happens. But this gets very tricky and very interesting if for whatever reason this Jets deal falls through, or if Woody Johnson, if the rumors about him being concerned now are really true, and what if he just pulls the plug on it? Like I said before, what if he's like, you know what? Let's call Baltimore. Let's see where their heads are at with Lamar Jackson. What if he calls Minnesota and Minnesota's willing to deal Kirk Cousins? And he's like, you know what? Let's go with Cousins instead. At least we're not going to get all this drama and headache along with it. I mean, we don't know how this is going to play out, but the draft is going to be a big indicator, because both the Packers and the Jets kind of have to know what their draft strategy is. And it's hard to know what your strategy is when you don't even know what's going on at your quarterback position.
Everybody's watching this Jets first pick to see how that one goes down, especially Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers does not get dealt to the Jets, I don't know that he plays unless he gets a nice contract, because that's clearly what he's looking for. He's looking for like one last nice big contract, even though he already has it. But you're right, that hole's already dug. He's not going to play in Green Bay this year. If Zach Wilson starts week 1 for the Jets should get a new stadium, because I'm sure the Jets fans will burn the current one down. Lamar Jackson, we've already brought that up. I think it's a great scenario. The Jets were already prepared to drop a giant bag for Aaron Rodgers. What's the difference if we drop a giant bag for a guy who actually wants to play, who actually wants to go out and earn it? And not a bad spot for Lamar Jackson. You got to change things up a little bit. Like I said, the Jets already got Lazard out of the deal, so that's nice. So they've got someone set up there. There are other teams that might be interested in Rodgers, so Rodgers isn't necessarily going to lose out. There's really not a huge loss for anybody if the Jets kind of pull the plug on this deal.
Right, and like the story that came out of the Packers early too is that they're not going to trade him to the NFC, so that already cuts the options in half. And if this is going to be post-draft, some of these quarterback needy type situations are going to change according to what happens in the draft. Look, Rodgers doesn't want to be a Packer anymore. I think that much is clear, and I also think it's pretty clear that the Packers are ready to move on from him as well. I think both sides want to move on, but that contract situation is a big looming issue. It is. I mean, it's a lot of money and it's a big deal. Rodgers is not retiring this year. If he retires this year, he loses out on $60 million. He's not going to lose out on $60 million. He's going to stick around at least 1 year, whether that be in Green Bay, which is just a nightmare, and I don't know how that would even work out. Like, does he, stay with Green Bay and be a backup, and they still play Jordan Love, and his contract is kind of there, but he's not really there? I don't know how all of that is going to work out. I just know that he has a lot of money due to him this year. He is not retiring before this year, and if this Jet deal doesn't get done before or during the draft, it becomes very messy and very confusing as to what happens to Aaron Rodgers.
Do you remember the tantrum? And it was a tantrum Rodgers threw when they drafted Jordan Love.
Oh, yeah.
Absolute tantrum. Then he went on to win 2 consecutive MVPs. But if the Jets were to pick up a quarterback at any point in the draft, that Rodgers deal is likely dead, because Rodgers isn't going to have it. Rodgers would be happy there was no backup behind him. That would be his ideal situation. He doesn't want to have to earn it. He's Aaron Rodgers. He's been built up as this elite first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. And you can make arguments with all the other stats, but you're right. Everybody looks at the Super Bowl, and he's only got one, and it was early, and he hasn't been able to back it up. And that's where those discussions come from. Is he really a first ballot Hall of Famer? Is he really an elite quarterback? Because aside from that one, he hasn't been able to back it up.
So right, and he won the 4 MVP awards, which is second most only to Peyton Manning. He's been, without a doubt, one of the best regular season quarterbacks we've ever seen. But
let's squash this conversation right now. He's definitely going to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I'm going to squash it without a doubt. He's a top 10 quarterback of all time. Some people will have him top 5, 6 to 10. He's top 10, no matter what. Just, what he's done does back that up. But Absolutely. Are you truly one of the all-time great legends of the game? Are you in the same breath as Peyton Manning, as Tom Brady, as guys like that when you only have 1 Super Bowl? Because look, even Peyton Manning, he only had 2. And someone as good as Peyton Manning, maybe you could make the case, I would make the case that he should have won more than 2. But at least he got there 4 times also. He won 4 conference championships and 2 Super Bowl rings. Rodgers only has 1 ring, and he's only been to 1 Super Bowl. He's never even been back since he won that Super Bowl more than 10 years ago at this point. That's a problem.
So here's the way you spin that. He's 100% in Super Bowls, right? We've been talking NFC North with Adam Hulse at Adam Hulse Sports. We've broken down every division at this point. Go back and listen to it. See how we went through each one, because it's intriguing. And what it's really going to bring it all together is in just a couple days, we're going to have the NFL draft, and we're really going to see how it all came out.
Oh, there's going to be plenty to talk about next week. Just because we've covered all 8 divisions leading up to the draft, as we promised that we would, that doesn't mean this is over. There's plenty more to talk about. There might even be more to talk about next week than there has this entire offseason, depending the way this first round plays out, right? I mean, in a crazy world, and this is actually somewhat of a possibility, what if Rodgers and Lamar Jackson both get dealt during the first round of the draft? You know, that can happen. That isn't like out of the realm of possibility. And maybe Rodgers isn't going to the Jets. Maybe someone else is going to swoop in. Who knows? And that's what makes the draft so exciting, what makes the offseason so exciting. And it's called the offseason, but it's really not off because there's always action and there's always stuff to talk about.
And it doesn't stop just because the draft happened. And Colin, I think the new term that we're going to coin is the A.J. Brown scenario. What is the A.J. Brown scenario for this year? Because it's going to happen. Speculation becomes reality. Fantasy becomes the truth. It all happens in just a couple days. Go catch Adam on Sportskeeda at Adam Hulse Sports is where you'll find all the places that contributes. Thank you guys for listening to That Effin' Sports Show, EFIN, That Effin' Show on Twitter. Be safe out there, everyone. Have a great one.
I'ma stay loud, stay proud, never running out, never heading south. I'll be spreading out, call it word of mouth. Can't put me down, I'll be getting loud. You can have it doubts, not what I'm about. Have your cloud, it be raining now. I keep making sound, go another round. I'm legend bound, can't stop me now.